What's happening? The fermented habanero relish is absolutely delicious. Packs the heat, packs the flavor, goes great on the traditional hot dog, of course. You got eggs, you got steak, etc, etc. So the first time I made it, I actually made it with jalapenos only. I mean, the flavor, of course, is there. The flavor, of course, is there, but it lacks that heat that I want, alright? That's where the habaneros come into play. So let's go over the ingredients really quickly. Hopefully it'll make it a little easier for you to understand about what's going on. We have the habaneros, of course. I have 15 of these. 3 jalapenos. 1 yellow bell pepper. That's just for color. 3 cloves of garlic. And a shallot. I'm also going to use spring water and some fine sea salt. Any kind of extra equipment that you're going to need, you definitely need a clean mason jar. This has been washed under hot soapy water. That's it. That's all you need to do. You need a digital scale, and I highly recommend wearing gloves when you're prepping habaneros. You definitely don't want to touch a habanero with your bare hands and then rub your eye. You'll have a bad rest of your day. The fermentation process is going to take about 7 days, so we need to start prepping those ingredients to start that initial fermentation process. So let's just get into it.
So the very first step that I do is wash all the peppers under cold running water. It's just fine, and then I just let them air dry on a clean towel. I'm going to start with the habaneros first. I'm just pulling the stems off the habaneros and cutting them in half. The main reason I'm cutting them in half is to inspect the seeds in the placenta. Make sure there's nothing discolored, no black seeds, no rotten anything inside. As I'm cutting up all the peppers, I'm really taking the time to look inside all of them and make sure none of them are discolored like you're seeing right here. The seeds are a little bit discolored, so I'm just going to use my knife and just scrape the placenta and the seeds right out of there. As for the jalapenos, I'm just cutting the stem end off and I'm cutting the peppers in half. I'm doing the same thing. I'm looking at the seeds inside and the placenta, make sure none of them are discolored. If they are, I just scrape them out. Cut them into 1/2-inch thick slices, about the same size as the habaneros. The garlic is rather simple. I take that outer pepper layer off and cut the root end off. As for the yellow bell pepper, I stand it upright. I'm cutting 5 seconds off of the pepper essentially. Again, I'm making sure that none of the inside of the bell pepper is rotten. Cutting up the bell pepper is about the same size as the jalapenos and the habaneros. Shallot, same thing. Take that outer pepper layer off and cut the root end off. Chop them up, same size as the rest of the ingredients. The whole idea is to have all the ingredients about the same size because they're going to process evenly, which is our next step. So I put all those ingredients into the food processor and I'm going to pulse this about 3 to 4 times, kind of see where we're at. I'm not really wanting to break these all down completely into a paste. I just want a rough chop. You could also do all of this with a knife if you don't have a food processor at home. It just takes a little bit more time. The processor does a pretty good job at chopping up all the ingredients somewhat evenly. I mean, that's why it's important to cut the ingredients previously somewhat evenly so that they process evenly, if that makes sense. A couple more pulses and then I think we're on to the next step. I put all these ingredients from the processor into a large mixing bowl. It makes it easier to transfer these ingredients into a mason jar, which is what we're going to be doing in a second here. I have a pint-sized mason jar. This one has a wide mouth on it. I mean, if you have mason jars that have a smaller mouth on it, absolutely fine too. If you have a funnel that has a wide enough opening, that will actually make your life a whole lot easier. So I turn the scale on, making sure that it's set to grams. Put the mason jar onto the scale, and then I zero that scale out. And then I'm going to put all those beautiful minced up peppers and garlic and shallot into that mason jar, filling it just about 3/4 of the way full of the mason jar. The next step is to make a brine. Now I'm using bottled spring water. You could also use filtered water. Make sure it's non-chlorinated, and I really prefer it to not have any chloramine in it as well. I'm filling that jar up with water about 1 inch or 2 with head space. You want to make sure that there's enough expansion room when you put the weight into it. I'm recording that weight, 312 grams. Multiply that by 2.5% and we get 7.8. That is grams. That is the amount of fine sea salt that we're going to need to make our brine. Now we're going to pour out some of that water in the mason jar into a mixing bowl. I use a lid from another mason jar to kind of help keep back the ingredients in the jar because we don't want any of the ingredients falling out with the water. Next, I put a small ramekin on the scale and zero it out. Now we're going to add the allotted amount of sea salt that we need, which is 7.8, but I'm going to round that up to 8 grams. That's not going to be a problem there. If you accidentally add too much salt to the ramekin, it's easy to take pinches out of it. So put the salt into the water, whisk it thoroughly to thoroughly dissolve, and now we're going to put that salty water solution back into the jar with the rest of the ingredients, making sure to get all of that salt dissolved and into that mason jar. Next, I have a Ziploc bag that's filled with water. This is going to be our weight. Normally, I don't like using plastic when I ferment, but this is the only option that I have to weight out the ingredients. If you have an actual fermentation weight, that would be ideal. Now, I keep mine in a glass dish. That way I catch any kind of overspill that may happen. Now, you want to make sure to keep all those ingredients underneath that brine level. This is called an anaerobic environment. If you have any ingredients that are allowed to touch any air, they will mold, and it is good practice that you completely scrap the project and start from scratch. You want to keep this at room temperature on the countertop, or I keep mine in the pantry, anywhere that it's away from direct sunlight, and the temperature ranges from 65 to 78 degrees. After day 3 or 4, you should see some fermentation activity start to happen. Now, fermentation bubbles, I like to describe it best as just a lazy carbonation. Like if you had lazy carbonated soda, you could definitely see some bubbling start to happen. I'm kind of stirring it a little bit just to kind of show you that it is in fact active after day 3. You can see the bubble starting to rise to the top after I get done stirring it. A very, very good sign. Now, after day 7, this should be ready to consume, but I do like to check the pH on it. It should be anything less than 4.6 to be considered safe to consume. This is sitting at 3.8, which is in the acceptable range. I find this fermented pepper relish to be quite delicious on the eggs. You can, of course, serve it on a hot dog, serve it on a steak, whatever you want to do. Now, if you want to see a delicious burger that this relish would go quite fantastically with, click that recipe card that you're seeing on the screen, and I will see you there.